There's reasonable concerns here because this demonstrates new and growing capabilities for China. There's no question that we have witnessed over the last 20 odd years the biggest expansion of any navy, perhaps since the Second World War. A significant modernisation, and that's taken material form in the ships that we see off the Australian coast now, particularly the largest of the ships here, the largest of the warships, which is the Type 55, a very new ship, the largest of its kind, much bigger than any destroyer that the Americans are building, and very powerful new capability.
Yes, could you give us more insights into what these ships, you mentioned one of them, what they are equipped to do?
Well, the largest one is the destroyer. Then there's a frigate that's alongside it, and then a replenishment ship. The replenishment ship is essentially there to keep the warships going, to refuel them, rearm them if necessary, but also keep the crews fed. The Type 55 is a destroyer that's really centred around trying to protect a naval task force from attacks by missiles and aircraft. The frigate probably has some anti-submarine duties. And you would expect that over the long term, as China's Navy develops further, both of these kinds of ships will be seen escorting an aircraft carrier. So that's something that I think over the medium term, over the next 5 or 10 years, Australia could expect to see in the region.
Yes, could these drills perhaps be in response, a sort of an initial starting response to what they might expect in the next decade or so with the AUKUS agreement and the submarines that may or may not be developed for Australia?
Yeah, I think definitely with the development of the submarine rotational force west in Perth, where American boats will be stationed, and then over the long term, the development of an East Coast submarine base, which will be used by Australia and the United States. Yeah, we're going to get a lot more interest from China. It's important to add a caveat here. The distances that China needs to cross to get to Australia are absolutely vast. And in the report that you just aired, you noted the development of a defence agreement between Australia and Papua New Guinea. Those kind of developments are important to make sure that those distances remain vast. I think the worst case for Australia would be that China develops basing capabilities in the Pacific Islands, and the kind of diplomatic manoeuvres that you're seeing today in Port Moresby, for instance, are, I think, a good example of of Australia preemptively trying to prevent China from ever having a permanent maritime or military presence in our immediate region.
And do you think Australia will then have to do more to, I suppose, engage with Cook Islands? They seem to be leaving it to New Zealand at the moment after the Cook Islands signed an agreement, a strategic deal with China. Should Australia now get in on the act as well?
Australia and New Zealand have upped their game significantly in the Pacific over the last few years, and I think there's plenty of room for cooperation between the two of them. New Zealand has particular specialties that should be exploited, should be used to the best possible effect, as does Australia in other parts of the Pacific. I'd like to see them working very closely together.
So in the case of what happened in the last 48 hours, the revelations we have seen, is China perhaps just testing the waters at the moment, see how far they can navigate before Australia makes a serious response?
Well, of course, Australia responds all the time. I mean, we send naval warships far to Australia's north. We've even sailed them through the Taiwan Straits in the past. We shouldn't be surprised or too offended when China does the same thing. It now simply has more capabilities to do that than it used to. So I think this is part of a long game that we're entering, a new phase with China now signalling that the Pacific is no longer an American lake. It is a contested space. And China intends to be a much stronger presence in the region.
Now, visibly, though, no one's hitting the panic buttons quite yet. But behind closed doors, Sam, do you reckon what might be happening, behind the closed doors of Defence and the Foreign Affairs Department?
I hope there's no panic. There shouldn't be. We've had indicators for a decade or more that China's Navy was expanding in this way and that its capabilities are going to grow in this way. And the indicators that I think we all see about Australian diplomacy in the Pacific in particular show that we do have a plan here for how Australia can maintain its own position in the Pacific and thereby make sure that when China does visit occasionally, when Chinese naval vessels do come through here occasionally, they've got to come from a long way away, and that makes their threat here, their presence here, much less potent than it would be if they were a more permanent presence.
Yes, and do you think China perhaps has more fuel to be a bit more brazen, given that Donald Trump on the other side of the world, he's more reluctant in terms of spending and on allocating resources to conflicts that are far afield from American shores?
Well, we've seen over the last decade or so a substantial rise in Chinese diplomacy and Chinese aid in the Pacific, for instance. And with the actions that the United States has taken on US aid recently, there is a great deal of concern in that region about who might take the place, who might fill in the gaps that America is leaving. So there is potential for that in the Pacific. More broadly, I mean, I don't think that Chinese foreign policy is particularly expansive in that regard. It is ambitious, but it doesn't want to see itself getting bogged down, for instance, in the Middle East, as America has been for decades now. So, I think the Chinese are taking the attitude that when they see the Americans making mistakes, they don't want to interrupt them.
Okay, Sam Raghuven, really good to get your insights and expertise into this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.